right, guys. Well, listen, it's that time of the show. It's time to look ahead. Decision day, Philadelphia Union, FC Cincinnati, the Jedi Master, the Padawan learner, who honestly is now a Jedi Master himself, as well, and Pat Noonan. So we're going to look at the other side now. And of course, we have you a special guest to look at things from the other side, the Cincinnati side. Please welcome from Cincy Soccer Talk. He is a tactics wizard, which I can't wait to talk about. Please welcome Coach Gough. Coach, what's happening? How are we feeling?
Oh, probably similar to Philadelphia these days. Not a whole lot of optimism here in the Queen City, but I'm doing okay myself.
I forgot they got the Bengals over there right now too. It's not looking great.
Bengals, Reds, FC Cincinnati isn't even giving us joy these days.
All right, so we shouldn't feel that bad, Renee. Yeah, it could be worse.
Sorry. Yeah, I know. We're always complaining, and then you hear what other cities' fan bases are feeling, and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe it's not so bad after all.
That is right. That is right. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to these two teams, tactics don't get too extensive, right? Especially Philadelphia. It's very straightforward. It's a diamond, tie press, compact midfield. What else are you gonna break down over there? Should be fun. But Coach, let's talk about your FC Cincinnati squad. We were just talking about them, and it's interesting because in general, like for me watching them throughout the season, like they don't feel like that 2023 squad. And obviously, go figure, it's year to year league. But like you guys were dominant last year, whether it be on in the back end or even in the front line with your attack. Brandon Vasquez was on an impressive run as well. What's been the main difference this year now that you're going into this decision day on a 4-game winless streak? What's going on in Cincinnati? Why not as dominant, Coach?
Yeah, you talked about getting caught up in what your own city's dealing with and forgetting that what's going around. I think internally we look and we forget that we've had a lot of turnover this season. You had stalwarts in the team, Brandon Vasquez, Junior Moreno, guys like that were Alvaro Barreal, important players last year depart the club. So you have a new cast of characters coming in and you think, but you have Lucho Acosta, you have, Obi Wobodo, these guys up the spine. We should still be good, but it's hard to change a lot of those ancillary parts and still keep the top end of the roster and those DPs and things humming along. So I think, to start the season, I predicted that they would finish probably 4th or 5th in the East because of that turnover. Then we started really well. And I got to just remember like, wait, we're actually probably right where we should be for the amount of roster turnover we've had this year.
So then that makes me curious. With this skid, are you feeling optimistic that this is who they are, or that this is just a temporary thing and a game like, I don't know, playing the Union on decision day is what's going to help them turn that corner? Because I do feel like sometimes teams get stuck in a rut and it's hard to get out of that, especially late in the season. But I don't want the Union to be the get right game. Where do you feel like, obviously they're already in the playoffs, so that's a given. Where do you feel like they are in terms of getting out of that rut? So we can have some optimism that the Union can squeeze out a result this weekend.
Yeah, they call me coach over at Cincinnati Soccer Talk because I view everything through that lens. I have a career where I coached soccer for a long time, college and club level.
Nice.
And it was really telling to me that Pat Noonan, the head coach for FC Cincinnati, who every game has been being like, we're seeing some good thing, every game has been like, it's not good enough. They're not playing hard enough. We're coming out flat. Too many turnovers. This past game, he turned that tune to, we're seeing some good things, just not getting the result. And that to me is telling that he thinks his team has lost their swagger, has lost their confidence. Because as a coach, if you think your guys are riding too high, you try to bring them down a few pegs. If you think they're riding too low, you try to balance that out. I do think this team is in a rut. I don't have a lot of optimism heading into the playoffs because I think there's a lot wrong with this team and how they're playing. And I think that confidence is gone. But you mentioned Philadelphia being a get right game. I don't really have any illusions that's going to happen. But this team, as well as the Union, has the amount of talent to where if they all of a sudden decide, hey, you know what, we can do this. I do think that either of these teams could make a run that maybe nobody's expecting.
And we were just talking about it too. Like it's very interesting that you bring that up because like we dealt with 10-game winless streak, and I mean I think you guys beat us during that run as well, and it's tough. Like it is confidence. A lot of it is mental. Like especially the way we were losing matches during that run. It's like that's uncharacteristic for Union soccer. It is very interesting, and it's tough to break out of it. And you're heading into the playoffs. The one time you don't want to get cold is right before the playoffs, and it's definitely going to be tough. But you obviously being the coach over at Cincy Soccer Talk, and you guys are kind of going through what we've been going through over the past couple of years with success, right? And the tough challenge, right? This is what we constantly talk about. Renee and I feel like every week we talk about this stuff as well. How do you keep the momentum from the team, from the squad, from year to year? The whole notion of running it back. Like this is something that we've debated and talked about over the past couple of years, because since that 2022 MLS Cup final for the Union, team has pretty much almost stayed the same. We finally had, Cooley and Carranza and Brujo Martinez sold in the middle of the year. But for you, like, is it important to bring back a lot of those players? Do you change it up from year to year? What's your mindset and philosophy with that, as Cincinnati's going to have to go through that for these next couple of off seasons?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what gets in a lot of people's way as fans is sentimentality, not wanting to see stalwarts of the team either drop to the bench to be, a bit player, or maybe even leave the team because it's time. But as a coach, you have to be able to take that sentimentality part out of your brain as a sporting director and say, we have to constantly be challenging ourselves to get better. And that means the players that are maybe just past their prime, really still useful players, but can you bring in a player that actually takes their starting spot and moves them into a backup role? In Cincinnati, it's a guy like Yuya Kubo. So many fans love Yuya Kubo. He's that kind of player that will play anywhere on the field, works tirelessly, has done a lot of great things. If you look at it just from a statistical perspective, he probably would be a really fantastic 12th man. A guy first sub off the bench, probably really shouldn't be starting a lot of games because he is a jack of all trades, master of none. When I look at the Union from an outsider's perspective, I see guys like Bedoya, and I think it's been really good that he's been moved to a bench role. He's still a very useful player in MLS, but if you rely on him because you always have, and because the fans love him, and because he brings that Philly mentality, there are going to be games when he just doesn't have it because he is getting on up there in age. So I think it's kind of a balance of being able to chop and change a little bit of those pieces, but you have to have those stalwart players that come year to year and maintain even from the bench, a Bedoya who is in the locker room leading. And I think FC Cincinnati has lost that a bit this year with the injury of Nick Hagland, a guy nobody thinks was going to be a starter this year, but is absolutely a team leader. And by being injured, he's not even in the locker room day in and day out anymore. And I think those kinds of losses are big for a team like this.
Plus, the other factor is when you have a player that's been a starter that's now coming off the bench, it actually raises the level of your team. You bring up like an Ali Bedoya. We've been saying that even with the back line between the center backs, Jack Elliott, Jakob Glesnes, one of them looking like they need to be upgraded. It's not always about being replaced. It's also about bringing in somebody that might be younger, fresher, different personnel, different tactical ideas, and just to now raise the middle. That now some of the players that are coming off your bench are guys that could be starters if you need them to, but you're not expecting them to be 90-minute players day in and day out. So it does sound like there are some similarities also even between the injuries and just the current form that Cincinnati has, similar to the Union, which makes me curious what has led to these breakdowns, because I think for the Union, what we've run into is it's time to make some roster moves to shake things up a little bit. They're predictable. It's gotten a little bit stale. Offensively, they've been actually very consistently strong of scoring 2+ goals a game. They've been generating a lot more. They've been creating a lot more. The chemistry is there. The movements are there. It's not even on the offensive side. You still have Andre Blake in net, but defensively as a team, there are a lot of breaks down that have caused them to get caught flat and get exposed. For Cincinnati, aside from maybe needing to make some roster moves to tweak things, what has been tactically the difference that's caused them to drop these, especially the recent games, but maybe even regress overall when you look at the season?
Yeah, when I look at things, I think that when you have guys that have not played a ton together, right? So you have Corey Baird coming in fresh this year, has never hit his heights. Kevin Kelsey coming in not before preseason, so didn't have that preseason, coming in kind of mid-season. Guys coming in over the winter like Chidozie Awazium. You have guys that haven't played a lot together. You start to rely on the things you know. Well, what do you know? If you check to Lucho Acosta, he will try to combine with you. But then what do you have? Every time Lucho picks up the ball, everybody runs towards him, pointing at their feet. Yeah, give me the ball. I'll combine. And nobody stretches the field, which makes the play actually really predictable because the defense can just tighten that space and not let you play out of it. With the Philadelphia Union, sometimes I think it's a little bit of the opposite problem. It's you've played so long together, you rely on these tactical ideals that have worked for you for so long, which a lot of the time, you mentioned it, JP, is just like, hey, up tempo, pressure, win that second ball. And then when you have a guy who maybe it's late in the season, he's a little bit older, maybe he's out of form, his confidence is down, maybe he doesn't have that spring in his step to win that second ball, and that's where things break down. So you have to strike that balance of being able to rely on those tried and true tactics that your team has always played with, but also have guys to be able to be creative within that. And right now, I think both of these teams are lacking that creativity. One relying totally on the tactics that have always gotten them there, and one relying totally on the vibes that Lucho Acosta can bring if you just run towards him, and everything just kind of goes flat.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because like that's just something that we've always talked about. And like one thing I always say too, like I think is important to have tactical flexibility. And like one thing that we kind of ran into as of late, but this has been a problem with the Union for the past 6 years, is when teams park the bus. And like it can be frustrating, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't score a goal on a team who does park the bus. And sometimes like I love our physical nature, right? Like the way we play, it's very reminiscent to like how Philadelphians like to watch their sports, right? Very physical, defensive oriented, and that's great and all. But like sometimes you do need to possess the ball. Sometimes you do need to build from the back and bring up. And there was a run where, it was working out well, but it can't just be on one side. It has to be on both sides, even going down the center of the pitch as well. And so, like, these are things that we constantly keep talking about and bringing up, just having some type of tactical flexibility. I always tell Renee about 2019, like, yeah, I know, like, it wasn't crazy tactic change, but like, 70th minute, the defense is tired. Who do you bring in? ALLCITY. And here comes ALLCITY, takes on 1v1s, even takes on 2 defenders at times, and it created opportunities. And so, like, no, we don't need to get another ALLCITY, but I do think some tactical flexibility would really help out this Philadelphia Union team. So it'd be interesting. Coach, Brandon Vasquez, I brought up earlier, big loss for you guys. You kind of touched upon it, but like he has been a big loss for you guys. The amount of goals he scored. I mean, Luciano Costa, obviously, you got a game plan for that. But back last year, it was also Lucho and Brandon Vasquez, and that's really tough to kind of defend against. What have you guys been doing to kind of replace him? And I guess, like, what is going to be the plan going forward? Because it seems like you guys haven't been able to replace him.
Yeah, so one of the big things that made Brandon Vasquez work so well within this system with Lucho was his movement was fantastic. Unbelievable movement in and around the box. Same with Julian Carranza. You guys are really familiar with this. A guy that knows how to peel off of the backside of those defenders, make those little darting runs in behind, like really good movement in and around the box that then frees up space where even when they're not scoring, it allows a guy like Daniel Gazdag to make a late run into the box and have that free space to score because Carranza has made such an intelligent run to the near post or whatever. We don't have that right now. We have guys who move really well but can't score at all, like Nico Gioacchini, who we brought in the winter, Corey Baird. Their finishing has just been non-existent. The movement's really good. And then we have a guy in Kevin Kelsey who is a really good finisher when he can get shots away, but his movement is almost non-existent. He's a big body. He just kind of still wants to hang out there, check to the ball, combine a little bit, but none of those selfless runs to create space for others. So FC Cincinnati has been relying almost entirely over this back half of the season on players like Luca Orishano, who plays mostly as a wingback for us, to create magic out of nothing, long distance shots, set pieces, very little of the kind of combination play that allowed Vasquez to score so many goals. And I think it's because of that movement. So for FC Cincinnati right now, it feels an awful lot like, if you can shut down Lucho Acosta and not let him create out of nothing, then the only way they're going to beat you is if a guy like Luca Orishano steps up and hits a 70-yard goal or, a 30-yard banger from a free kick.
So what you're basically telling me is you guys are us.
Yeah.
It's like the Spider-Man meme.
Literally.
Like, wait a minute, are you us? Because that is, well, old us, I should say. That's not the Union's offensive identity anymore. We have evolved from that. The Union have absolutely been much better, complete opposite of what you're saying, of getting opportunities in the run of play. It's the combination play. Sometimes it is still leaning and relying on set pieces and flank services, but it's been a lot more of a team build-up, possession-oriented style where they're breaking down opponents' back lines, getting numbers forward versus going with just one or two. So unfortunately, I empathize a lot with where you are, because it wasn't too long ago we were complaining about the Union's offense having the same struggles, the inability to create, the inability to be dynamic, and it being very predictable. But now it's been a lot more interchanging. And so for the Union, it's been on the defensive side. It seems like for Cincinnati, it's been a little sprinkle of everything, but especially offensively, because we know in this league, if you're not generating, you're defending. If you're giving the ball away, you're forcing shots from distance, or forcing build up out of the back that's not on. You don't have the numbers. You don't have the attackers that can hold balls up and sustain possession higher up the field. You're defending. And that's not a great recipe for success. So my last question for you is, given the nature of where both these teams are, what do you predict is the keys to this game, for this matchup? For obviously the Union have to win. Decision day, if they don't win, there's no way they get in. If they win, they still might not get in, but they need to win. Whereas for Cincinnati, you're in the playoffs, but Cincinnati also knows they need to get back on track to be prepared for a good postseason run. So what are your keys for this matchup between the Union and Cincinnati?
To me, I really feel like the game is going to be won or lost for both teams on the Philadelphia right-hand side, the FC Cincinnati left. If you have a guy like Quinn Sullivan working tirelessly up and down that flank, as well as coming into the midfield to help create against whatever FC Cincinnati throws out there at wingback, which has been typically either Luca Orishano or Yamil Assad, both of whom are not defenders at all, who really just want to play offense. And then Ian Murphy at left center back, or Teenage Hidebe, who we brought in, who really hasn't settled yet. So if Quinn Sullivan can continually get penetration down that right-hand side and put a Hidebe or a Murphy into 1v1 situations, I think that the Union are going to have a lot of joy. I think on the other side of that, if FC Cincinnati can push Sullivan back into a more defensive role back there on the right and pin him back a little bit, and have Yamil Assad or Luca Orishano be able to even come into the midfield and pull him deeper into that defensive midfield sort of role that sometimes those shuttlers can accidentally fall into if they're following those flank players, then I think it'll be hard for Philly to even get out of their own end without hitting long balls. And FC Cincinnati, for all of their defensive frailties this year, which have not been a ton, but one that is definitely not there, is, winning those long balls. They didn't generally do a pretty good job on the first long ball there. So maybe, I don't know if this is good or bad for Philadelphia, but your hopes maybe hang on the balance of Quinn Sullivan.
Wow, Quinny boy. I mean, at least he didn't say Kevin. So
yeah,
because we're kind of cabined out over here with that story. But last but not least, Coach, we got to ask you, what's your prediction? What do you see happening this Saturday? Union Cincinnati in Chester, Pennsylvania. What's gonna happen, Coach?
I think it's a really tough one, but I actually think there are going to be goals in this match. FC Cincinnati, Chidozie Awaziam, if he plays at all, it's going to be his first game back from a hamstring injury, so I think he probably won't play. Miles Robinson will be coming back from a long international break, even if he doesn't get minutes in tonight's game, the flight and the travel. So I think there will be goals there for the Union. The Union hasn't really had a Union style of defense this season, as you all know. So I think if I and being honest, I'm going to pick a 2-2 draw. And if I'm being extremely hopeful, I think maybe, Lucho Acosta pulls some magic out at the end and gives SC Cincinnati a 3-2 win.
Real quick before we let you go, I know Miles Robinson was dealing with injury earlier this year, but how's he been overall this year?
I think he's been understatedly good. And I say that because if you actually look at his defensive metrics, stats and things, he's been really good. He's had a couple of high profile mistakes. So fans here are kind of down on him. And he's had to flip a lot back and forth between playing right center back and center back, which it's not a huge difference, but it makes a difference in terms of your mentality of playing that same position day in and day out. So I've been pretty happy with Miles. I think if he could play in a stable back line where the other players around him are pretty much the same game in and game out, I think he'd be a lot better, but I would give him maybe a B+ for the season. For sure. Well, Coach, where can people find you? You can find me on any of the socials at FC Cincy Tac Talk. And then if you just, want to hear what's going on your sister team over here in Cincinnati, Justin Hoyt, former Arsenal player Justin Hoyt, and I do a podcast every week called Talking Tactics with Coach Gough, where after this match, we'll break down all the goals, talk about the big tactical ideas for both teams. So you can check that out as well. Well, listen, you don't want to miss that one. It's always a pleasure talking to you. You have some amazing insight. So we look forward to maybe in the playoffs, but if not, we'll talk to you next year. Would love that. Thank you.
We all silly like the mayor.